This is our Church360 Ledger Setting Up Your Account Overview webinar. I'm Anna Johnson. I'll be hosting today. I'm a marketing manager here at Concordia Technology Solutions. You can see my name and my email right there. Feel free to contact me anytime after the webinar starts. We're always here to help, even if you're watching this later or you need to share it with a friend. Okay, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going today. We have 25 minutes for the presentation and 5 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask those throughout. If I don't get to it right away, I'll definitely get to it by the end of the presentation, and the recording will be shared. So if you're at your church and somebody else couldn't make it today, please feel free to know that we'll share this recording afterwards. Our outline for training today is that we'll go through some basic accounting principles, including fund accounting, cash accounting. We'll go through books, fiscal years, account types, which include assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. And then we'll also go through our chart of accounts report and then talk a little bit about users and settings permissions. So that's where we're going. We're going to start off with basic accounting principles, and I always want to lead off that I am not an accountant, so don't come to me with accounting questions or advice. But the purpose of this webinar is to show you how to use the software, and to understand the software, you'll need to kind of understand where our developers were coming from when they use the software. So in fund accounting, each book is a separate accounting entity with its own assets, liabilities, income, and expense accounts. So, for example, in your Church360 Ledger account, you might have a church book, a school book, a preschool book. Each of those would be separate revenue streams and also expense accounts, so you would want those to be separate books. Now, say you had something like a youth group at your church. You can use a restricted fund within the same book for items like that. But when it's a completely separate entity, completely different chart of accounts, you always want to use a separate book for that in Church360 Ledger. So any transfers between books should be considered a loan that is to be paid back. That's a really important point. So if you're loaning money between things, set those up as different books. If money kind of flows freely to different ministries and areas, that's something that can all be set up in one book. We also use cash accounting, and the two big points here is that when you receive income, it's recorded right away and recognized right away, and also the same for expenses. So your expenses are recorded and recognized as soon as those expenses are spent. So now that we have that in place, let's get started. So I'm going to go over to my chart of accounts here. I'm going to actually discard my changes here. So we'll go to our church book. And just quickly before we get into that, I want to show you guys the login screen. So here is the main login screen for Church360 Ledger. There's a couple of things I want to note here. First and most important, everybody who's using Ledger should have their own unique email and password. So if you are someone at a church and you have a different role than someone else, make sure that both of you have a different login. We've had a couple churches ask us, oh, can we share logins? And we don't really advise that, because one of the tracking features that we'll get into later is how Ledger tracks your usage by who was logged in at the time. And so to build transparency, we definitely recommend that everybody has their own separate email account. You can always reset your password from right here. And if you're just starting out and you're not sure even how to get to this screen or how to enter your subdomain, you can always click here to receive your unlock instructions. So I'm going to get signed in here. This is my main book, which I use all the time. You can see I have a ton of transactions here. Everything's filled out. But since we're kind of starting from scratch today, we're going to show you how you would get started if you had a brand new book. So to do that, you'll just click on the settings cog and then click books. And you can see here's my list of books here. If you had a lot of books for some reason, which probably you won't, you could use a filter here. So you would just type in church book. I'm going to start out as if we're starting out from scratch and then click add a new one. So to add a new one, you just put in the name of your book. So we'll pretend this is the preschool book. Oh, Hold on there for a minute. Preschool, there we go. And then you pick your starting month for your fiscal year. Now, most churches we think are using a January to December fiscal year, so you can just select January there. If you have a different fiscal year, that's fine. You can always select that from this menu, and you can always also change that later. So if I know we've gotten a couple emails from churches lately where they're thinking about switching maybe to a July start on their fiscal year, that's fine. You're always able to do that. The difference here between your starting month for your fiscal year and the starting date for your beginning of your book activity is that the beginning date of the book activity is when you want to first enter transactions. So I know that right now today, for example, it is March 2nd, so you might want to start entering back transactions all the way back to January. Make sure that date is the date of your first transaction, even if it's not in the current fiscal year. I'm going to click Submit here. There's a message that comes up right here to let you know your book was created. And then to go access that book, all you need to do is click on the book selector up here, and then we'll select Preschool. You can see that it'll give you a message while it's waiting that the current book was changed to preschool, and you can see that this is all zeroed out here so you know what's going on. Okay, once you're in your book, I just want to show you what I was alluding to earlier, and that's about changing your fiscal year. So say you wanted to change your fiscal year to start in July. That's fine. You can see that right now it gives your current fiscal year up here in the left-hand corner. It says January to December 2017, but say I wanted to change my next fiscal year to start in July. You can do that. Just click on July from this top drop-down menu and then click Save. And you'll get a message to let you know your new fiscal year has been created. And then as soon as I refresh here, hopefully what happens, is that this message right here will say January to June 2017. So you can see that it's still my current fiscal year. It didn't reset anything for the current year. But when it would come to July 2018, you would have 2 fiscal years listed down here. And this will be really important when we start talking about budgets. I think that webinar's in a couple weeks. So your budgets are always determined by your fiscal years. Okay, the next thing we want to do is get into our chart of accounts, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. So in your chart of accounts, there's a couple just broad overarching things you want to know. So you have your assets, your liabilities, your income, and your expenses. Each of these you can see is expandable or collapsible. There's not much to look at now that I won't have anything in there, but we'll change that soon. And you'll also see that there's accounts and categories in each one. The important thing to know here is that accounts roll up into categories. So maybe say you were setting up your assets account, and again, assets are kind of items your congregation owns. So say your congregation had 2 banks, for example, you use. So you wanted to have your first bank and you wanted to have your second bank, okay? So if you saw what I was doing there, I'm entering these as categories. And one little clue to let you know that you've created a category is this teal bar right over on the left here, and that'll let you know it's a category versus an account. And then say you had a checking and a savings account within each of your asset accounts. So we'll have first checking account. And if you had an account number, you can enter that here. I'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then select if this is an account that uses checks or not, and then enter your initial balance. I'm just going to enter an initial balance of 0 today. Although, again, if you're coming from an actual bank account, you'll want to enter whatever your balance was on that date that your book began. Now, I don't want my first checking account appearing under my second bank. So what I want to do is just move this up here. All you can do is drag and drop. You can see there's a little red indicator arrow there on the left. And then I always find it helpful to kind of show these through indentations. And so to do that, all you do is click and drag, and you can see that my arrow can drag over here. And then let's say I wanted to do the same thing except for a savings account. So I'll do first savings account, and we'll give this a different item number. I'll say no checks from this account, but that'll have a $0 starting account. And then I just click and drag and then indent over. And we'll do the same thing at our second bank. So we'll do second checking account, and we'll do, and let's say this second checking account had a $1,000 beginning balance. Just do the same thing with my indentations here. And the important thing to note here, if you can see, my second checking account balance is $1,000, and then that rolled up into my category balance for second bank. Same thing up here with 0 and 0. I'm going to add just another second savings account so you can see how those numbers change over time. So we'll do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 2, 3. And again, these account numbers can be really in any format you want them to be. And then for initial balance for your savings account, let's say that was $5,000. Now, as soon as I hit submit, you should see, and I save changes, it'll let me know what I did. If I click confirm and then refresh, didn't do that right. There you go. As soon as I have this listed under my main category, you can see that the totals roll up here. So we have $1,000 in checking and $5,000 in savings for a total of $6,000 at my second banking category. Another thing to note here, whenever you're saving changes from the chart of accounts, it'll let you know that you've rearranged or created accounts or categories, and you can just confirm that here. Great. So what we want to keep doing is adding these accounts and categories for each of these subsequent items. Now, before I get there, though, you can see that for checking and savings, and this is something only for asset accounts, you can add what we call a restricted fund. So a restricted fund is when money at your church is given for a specific purpose. So if I had a restricted fund under my first checking account, maybe say this was the youth fund, and people were at my church were giving to the youth, and they wanted to make sure that only the youth could spend that money, like it couldn't be used for general expenses or anything. Just need to create that new restricted fund and then click submit. And you can see as soon as I create my youth fund as restricted, I also got this added for an unrestricted fund for my first checking account, and that's just to show the titles there. So I'm going to add just one more restricted fund to show you how easy that is. Let's say we'll do one for the youth fund, and since we're at a preschool, we'll do education fund. You can see that's been added right there. I'm going to save my changes again. It lets you know how many accounts have been created. The next thing we're going to do is move over into liabilities. So liabilities are kind of debts your congregation owes, maybe unpaid bills that are coming up. People use this most of the time for things like taxes, for Social Security. So what we do here, let's just create a category for taxes. And then under here we'll have federal taxes. You can do the same thing with account numbers here, enter your initial balance. You can do state taxes. And then we'll do one for maybe Social Security. And then enter my initial balance there. Now again, same principles apply here. So if I want my accounts to roll up into that category, all I'll need to do is indent them right there so we can see what's going on. Excuse me. And then we'll save. You can create as many of these liability accounts as you want. Just do save changes. Let you know how many categories and accounts. If you didn't want to save those changes, you can always discard too. Excuse me. That's really important to know. So next thing we're going to do is create some income and expense accounts. And it's important that when you're creating these two, you kind of have in mind how the money is coming in versus how it's going to go out, so that those things are always parallel. Now, we think that most users are coming in and you do have your chart of accounts set, whether it was in Excel or in another program you're coming from. So hopefully you're familiar with this concept. What we're really trying to show you is how this concept works in Ledger. So since we're at a preschool, let's create some new categories for income. So let's say we had one category for books, one category for supplies, and maybe another category for snacks. And I know I'm oversimplifying this. This will just be for example purposes today so you can see how everything works. So I have those three categories, and then I can add different accounts within each of those categories. So if we wanted to say books, maybe we had textbooks, and we can do an initial balance again, account number, and then we wanted to do books for reading time books. Notice here too, if I forget to enter an initial balance, you'll get this nice little message here that asks you to please fill out the field. I'm going to just click 0 right here. And then you'll just have to click and drag and indent so that those fall under your books category. You can keep doing the same thing for supplies, for snacks, for whatever you have. I'm not going to fill this all out today, just so you know how that whole concept of chart of accounts works. We'll do save changes. Again, it'll let you know, give you a chance to confirm. Then we can do the same thing for expenses, and I'm going to keep that structure parallel here. So we'll do books, and then we'll do, forgot what I had actually. There we go. Do supplies, and then we'll do snacks. Okay. And then it's the same process again to create a sub-account under that category. And I'll show you in this example, we'll see maybe we already had something in our expense accounts. We already had an initial balance. So for books, we had textbooks. Let's say we have $500 left in there for this year. And then we had reading time books. And then you can enter account number. Say you had maybe $250 left for that for this year. So we'll just drag and drop. You can see again the totals rolled up, and then we'll click Save Changes. So it lets you know I had these new categories and new accounts created, and that my chart of accounts was updated. So I'm going to expand this just so you can see how everything looks. There's our assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. Now, if at any time I need to change my beginning balance, I can do that up until the point of my first reconciliation. So that's how I change my category. I'll just click in here, and you'll see it'll let me change my textbooks beginning balance. So say I had $1,000 that came in this year. Once I click Save and refresh, you can see that my chart of accounts was updated to reflect that change. I'm going to just do the same for my reading books here, so we have something to look at later. And again, save, confirm, and then refresh. So another takeaway here is don't get worried if you make that change and you're like, where did my money go? You do have to save and refresh oftentimes to see things when you're updating your chart of accounts. I know when I was first getting set up, I thought things weren't getting added in, and it was because I just forgot to save and then refresh. So make sure you're doing that if you want to be updating your chart of accounts. Again, you can only update your beginning balances up until the point of your first reconciliation. So make sure you have that set before you reconcile for the first time. So for our purposes today, I think these things are all set. Just one more thing to go over here is if you ever get confused about what each of these four mean, we do have an article on this in the help system, and it's called Basic Terms. Hopefully it'll come up here. Basic terms to understand when using Ledger. So just know that this help system is always available for you in Ledger. You can see that it talks about assets. You have your current and your fixed assets, your liabilities, so it gives you examples of different types of liabilities, what income accounts are and what expense accounts are, and also restricted accounts. So if you forget anything I said today but you don't want to sit through the whole webinar, just know that that help article is in the system to help you out once you're getting set up. Okay. The next thing we want to do is, after your chart of accounts has been set up, you'll want to be able to report on that periodically. This does not make a very pretty report, I'll admit. It's very hard to read. But we do have a separate chart of accounts report here in Church360 Ledger that you can use. So to access that, all you would do is go up to this notebook thing. That means reports, and you can see there's 4 reports in here. And then click on Chart of Accounts. And you can see here that your entire chart of accounts is listed in here. Now, because we haven't entered any transactions yet, you can see that all my starting and ending balances are the same. Important things to know, though, in this chart of accounts report is that these are expandable and collapsible. So if you want to just give a really big, broad overview of what's going on at your church, you could really just collapse everything into those 4 assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. And you can see starting balance, ending balance, debits, credits, dollar change over time, and percent change over time. Now, if we had more than one fiscal year, and here, even if we had more than one transaction, you'd be able to select that in your date selector here to see how things change over time. But you can also expand these too, and I find this is really helpful if you want to get the really broad overview to look at your chart of accounts if you want to export to Excel. So let's do that right now. All you need to do is click on this Export to Excel button. You can see there's a message down here. It's telling us we're waiting for Ledger. It'll take me just a few minutes to get Excel started on my computer here, and then we'll get it set up. While that's setting up, though, you can also print directly from this screen. So if you don't want to do any manipulation with your chart of accounts report in Excel, just know that that button's here as well to get you started. It looks like Excel has started for me. I just want to show you guys what this looks like when you export your chart of accounts. So you can see it gives your church name, chart of accounts balances, and then your time period, so January 1st through December 31st. If you had any inactive accounts, they would be noted here. And then it gives you everything listed here and the dollars and categories. One nice thing here too is, especially with those categories, the numbers don't export statically, they export as a formula. So you can see here in my books category, this is just $0, right? But if I go up here, it's letting me know, and I'm even going to expand these rows, just unhide the rows here. So if I look in textbooks and reading time books, you can see this is just a flat rate. But when you export to Excel, we build in the calculations for you for categories. So you can see that books was one of my categories, and it's adding together cells B32 and B33. So if you wanted to test out anything, these numbers would automatically update in Excel. Now you'd still have to go back and change those in Ledger, but if you were just kind of playing with numbers, you didn't want to set anything up straight in Excel right away, or in Ledger right away, you could do that here. And notice here that all these accounts were collapsed like I had in my original report. To make this the full view, you just right click and unhide, and you can see everything's listed in here just like I want it. So that is the chart of accounts report. We have just about 10 minutes left here, it looks like. So I'm going to go over to my users and permissions. So to get to users, we'll just click the settings cog and go to users. And users are just lists of people who use Church360 Ledger at your church. So if I wanted to add a new one, we'll just do Anna.Johnson at CPH. This is our, there you go. And you can assign any roles to individual users. Now you can see I have a lot of different roles in here. You might be wondering where those came from. I'll submit this first. Roles come from your own doing. We don't have any predefined roles for you in Ledger except for this administrator role, because you need kind of always one person that's running this ship, always one person who has access to everything in Ledger. So this administrator role is built in, but all of these other roles are just things I've created based on potential different positions at my church. One important thing to note here is when you're getting started with setup is that roles, excuse me, let me get out of there. There we go. Roles apply either to a specific book or to just one book, and that'll be really important on our example today. So if you had a music director, for example, at your church, but they didn't work at the school, you can make that music director access just that information at your church. Or conversely, say you had a preschool director at your church. We'll do this, preschool director. You know that you only want this person to access the preschool book, so you just select that here, and then you select this person's permissions. So since it's a director, we'll have our preschool person view all of our accounts, and if I click manage here, it gives that person access to everything. And I'm kind of creating essentially an administrator role that's just for the preschool book. So this is really powerful if you have multiple directors at your church or between your church and school. You can give them essentially all access to their area while restricting access to other areas of the church. Now, say you had a preschool administrator. You wouldn't want that person to manage everything, but you would want them to be able to see some things. So let's just say preschool admin. And instead of just managing the chart of accounts, you wanted them to view accounts. Now, in viewing accounts, you have two different options. Either that person can view all accounts or you can view a subset of accounts. I'll show you how that works in just a minute. And then you select which other functions you would like that person to perform. So maybe the administrator could create deposits but not journal entries, maybe create payments but they can't print checks, which would be a big thing here. Actually, a better example would be that they could create checks but not print checks and can't edit transactions. So you see you're restricting kind of the usage here for that person. To select which accounts a person can see, you just need to click in that role and then you select whichever accounts you want that person to see. So we'll just say that this person can see only the first account. They can't see any liabilities accounts, but they can see all our income and expenses accounts. One thing to remember here from within your permission roles is that this screen saves automatically. So there's no save button on here. So as soon as I close out, you can see it says can view 9 selected accounts, and then when I click submit, it lets you know my role was updated. Now, kind of tying this back to users here, you saw how I could add a new user and add existing roles to it. What if I wanted to add a new role to an existing user? That's easy too. So we'll take this account that I created just a few minutes ago and say I wanted to make this person the preschool admin person. All I need to do is just click in their name. Let me do that again so make sure you saw it. Just click in their name. And then you can pick preschool administrator, for example. You can click submit and it lets you know the user was updated. Another important thing here is resend the invitation. So if you're an admin on your account and you're inviting new people and they said, oh, I didn't get it, that's fine. You can always click resend invitation right here. And you can always delete or deactivate users. So you can see this person here doesn't have any roles. If I wanted to delete them as a user, say they left my church or something, you can delete them. And then they don't have permission to view your books anymore. So that would be really important if, excuse me, you had people coming and going out of different roles at your church. You could either delete that person altogether or you could take away their roles too, and that would make sure that that person didn't have access to anything you didn't want them to have access to. One more thing I want to show you before we go back to questions today, and that is how these users and roles matter for your church. So to see who's doing what, all you need to do is go to your reports and then do event log. And this ties back to what I was saying at the beginning about having each person at your church have a different user role. You can see that each one of these, every single action I've taken starting back way when I started this webinar is recorded here in my time log. So you can always see who's doing what in your book. If there's any question, either somebody made a mistake or there's something suspicious, you can always go back and see that in Church360 Ledger. So hopefully you'll be able to use that too as you get started, even as you're tracking what kind of changes you made over time there. Well, I think we're just about at the end of our half hour, if not over. So thank you guys for coming today. Just a few more things to make you aware of. We do have a product blog. This gives you any updates to the software. You can just visit 360ledger.com/blog. You can see any of our back articles on there. And then we also have a training manual that's available for $25 plus shipping. But before you go out and buy that, just remember that we do have all these training materials in the help system. So if you ever need to use that, you're definitely able to. Again, I'm Anna Johnson. Here is my contact information, my name and my phone number. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions after watching the webinar. So thanks everybody for coming today, and hopefully we'll talk with you real soon.